Today, we're going to talk about healing the inner child. By the end of this video, you're going to understand how attachment shapes the inner child. You're going to understand signs of whether your inner child needs healing. And finally, you're going to understand some safe steps to take to begin to heal the inner child. Hi, if you're new to me, my name is Tom Philp, and I've been working with couples and individuals for decades to help them resolve their attachment or relational trauma so they begin to trust themselves and others and create a sense of a safe and secure relationship. All right, let's dig in. So, healing the inner child. Now, I'll just say straight out as a disclaimer, this is something that I've struggled with myself. The term doesn't fall very easy on my ears. I always thought it was kind of a little bit, I don't know, it just didn't sound like a very caring, warm phrase to me. It sounded kind of, I don't know, silly in some ways. So it's a term I've kind of struggled with for years. Maybe you're like me, maybe the idea of an inner child feels a little bit strange, and I totally get that. Maybe you're not like me at all. Maybe comforting and healing the inner child actually feels like a soothing, warm thing for you, and I totally respect that. But it's just something that I've sort of struggled with in terms of a phrase itself. Now, what I don't struggle with at all is that there are parts of us that show up sometimes almost as a little child. And I totally get that. There are parts of us that can be frozen. There are parts of us that can be stuck in time due to our past trauma. And sometimes when that gets triggered, we can disproportionately show up as a younger part of ourselves for sure. So I don't question the concept so much as sort of the phrasing of it itself. But with that being said, let's talk about how does our attachment longings, how does our attachment environment actually shape the inner child? Well, typically we all grow up in a family of some kind, and those families can look very, very different. If we are fortunate enough to be able to grow up in a family where we have a good enough environment, then what happens is we have a safety cushion. We have caregivers that allow us to show up in less than perfect ways. As we're beginning to learn to express our emotions, as we're beginning to learn to regulate our emotions, sometimes we don't act or respond perfectly. And yet, the adult or the caregivers in our lives are attuned enough to us that they allow us that emotional expression that we can then ultimately become a part of ourselves. And as it matures, we learn to respond better. So think about, a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old having a meltdown, as they often do, right? Something that might be very inappropriate to the situation, very childlike in its response. And yet, if we have an adult that's responsive and available to us in those moments, then they're going to help us be able to work through that in a constructive way. So that as we mature, we will no longer have the same kind of meltdowns. Instead, we will emotionally mature and be able to begin to express ourselves and communicate our wants and needs in different ways. If, however, we grow up in an environment that doesn't provide that kind of safety net, that sense of security, that you can express yourselves and learn and develop and grow and not have to be perfect in this family, or if we show up in an environment where there's a restriction around being able to express our feelings, then oftentimes that part of us can get stuck and stay frozen. What are some examples of maybe needing to heal our inner child? Well, certainly one of those examples is we might get triggered and have a disproportionate emotional feeling to the situation. Let me give you an example. Many years back, I went to my high school reunion. It was our 20th reunion. Now, by all rights and purposes, I was doing okay in life. I, been around the sun a few times. I had gotten married by that point, fairly, doing well in my career, that kind of thing. And yet, when I went back to be with these same people in high school, what got triggered inside of me was this sense of inadequacy. I began to feel like that same awkward adolescent child that I felt like when I was around these people in high school. And they weren't treating me poorly. They weren't, nothing like that. But it was disproportionate to the situation. That's when I knew that I had a little bit of inner child work to do. I had a little pocket of inadequacy that could show up when I go back into a situation like that. And so I don't know if any of you all have ever struggled with that, but that was certainly one of the times that it stood out for me. Oh my gosh, this feeling like I'm having, it very much reminds me of like I felt in high school, this sense of trying to fit in, trying to belong. We have a term now in culture called FOMO, fear of missing out. I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got to go to this party or I've got to be with this group because I don't want to miss out. It was all being driven from this sense of inadequacy and trying to measure up, as so many of us struggle with in high school for sure. So that's kind of an example of if you feel like these emotions get triggered inside of you and you begin to respond in a way that's somewhat disproportionate to the situation, this could be a clue that you need some inner child work. Certainly, if there are times where you feel triggered because you feel abandoned or rejected by your partner. If you feel like your attachment style shows up because you're perceiving danger or disconnection in your relationship, and you feel yourself starting to get flooded and extremely anxious, and you notice that all of a sudden you're really pushing your partner to open up and stay engaged and talk through whatever it is that's going on right now, your attachment style can be a disproportionate response. Or if you find yourself shutting down, right? Trying not to make it worse, scared to talk or communicate about something because you're afraid it will cause an argument with your partner. These are all pretty good signs that ultimately you may have a part of you that feels more childlike, an inner child that needs some healing, because what's happening in the here and now is actually sort of an emotional flashback to what happened then. So how do we begin to heal this? 3 steps. The first one is recognition. We can't solve anything if we don't first recognize it. We have to be able to begin to recognize these things when they show up. When we're all of a sudden flooded with anxiety, all of a sudden we feel a sense of shame come over us. All of a sudden we feel a sense of sadness come over us. These are cues that our emotions are cueing us into something that is happening for you in this moment, but that actually may have to do with something in the past. And so, first of all, being able to recognize it is extremely important. Secondly, we want to tug on that thread a little bit, and we want to be able to understand how do we connect what's happening now to what happened back then. Oh my gosh, I'm feeling that sense of inadequacy all over again. I'm feeling that sense of like I'm trying to find my way in the world. Sometimes I don't feel noticed or different in any way. And man, that same insecure feeling is coming up for me again. That's what this is about. So we have to tug on that thread. We have to understand how what's happening in the here and now might connect to past feelings for us. And then, of course, we have to be able to dig down and understand, what am I lacking? What was missing for me then that I either need to reach out for and get help with now, or, and probably this is more important, I need to be able to access within myself, for myself, in the here and now. How can I show up at my 20-year high school reunion and have an internal conversation with myself that takes me out of this sense of shame, that pulls me out of this sense of insecurity? And how can I be able to talk through so that I can stay engaged in those moments, so that I don't ruin the occasion for myself, so that I don't create a self-fulfilling prophecy by enacting some behavior that actually causes me to feel more insecure, by blurting out something in a moment of insecurity that has people looking at me like, what are you talking about? What's going on with you? Right? Because these feelings have ways of showing up in our adult relationships that can actually bring about the very thing we fear the most. So being able to access parts of ourselves so that we can heal that inner child. And when we do that, we actually then, we have more access and more tools available to us in those moments for sure. So this three-step process I want to talk about because I know it seems like, oh, just do this, this, and this, and you're good to go. I understand it is messy. I understand that what I'm talking about here is not always linear. Maybe it's 3 steps forward and 6 steps back at times, and I get that. I've struggled with that too. I understand how hard that can be. But being able to follow as a schematic these 3 steps, recognition, tying it to the past feeling, and then providing whatever the need was in that moment, either for myself or being able to reach out to somebody else that can provide it for me, a safe person in your life to do that, that can begin to heal that inner child.